In one of the final scenes of the entire show, after the wars, after the dragons, after the throne is melted and the queen is dead and a boy who can see through time is sitting on a wheelchair ruling the Six Kingdoms, there's a moment that almost nobody notices. It lasts about 30 seconds, no dialogue, just a man walking into an empty room and straightening chairs. And if you blink, you miss it. But if you catch it, if you actually watch what Tyrion Lannister is doing in those 30 seconds, it changes the way you see the entire show. Because those chairs aren't just chairs, they're the final answer to a question the show has been asking for 8 years. Did Tyrion become his father? So, let's talk about what happens in that room, because it's one of the most brilliant hidden details in the entire series. I mean, the scene is almost aggressively mundane. The war is over, King's Landing is half rubble, Bran Stark is the new king, though what that actually means in practice is anyone's guess.
Lord Tyrion, you will be my hand.
Again, and his first act isn't a speech, it isn't a decree, it isn't a dramatic confrontation with a rival. His first act is to walk into the small council chamber before anyone else arrives and push the chairs up against the table, one by one, adjusting each one, making sure they're straight, that they're even, that the room looks right before anyone walks in. He fusses over them the way a nervous host fusses over a dinner table before guests arrive. Everything has to be in order. Everything has to be exactly right. Now, on the surface, this is just Tyrion being Tyrion, the little man who can't control the world, so he controls what he can. But there's something else going on here, something the show trusts you to remember from 5 years earlier. Because this isn't the first time someone arranged chairs in this room, right? You might remember the scene. Tywin Lannister, newly arrived as Hand of the King, walks into this exact chamber and takes his seat at the head of the table. But he's done something before anyone enters. He's placed all the chairs on one side, 5 chairs in a row, lined up to his left like a classroom. No chair across from him, no equal. Just one man at the head and everyone else forced to sit beside each other, looking at him sideways while he stares straight ahead. It was a test, a power play disguised as furniture arrangement, and every person who walked in revealed exactly who they were by how they reacted. Littlefinger sprinted for the closest seat to power. Varys took what was left with a smirk. Pycelle shuffled into whatever remained. Cersei picked up a chair and carried it to Tywin's right hand, because she's Cersei and she sits where she decides. And Tyrion dragged his chair, loudly and slowly, scraping across the stone floor for an agonizing 10 seconds, all the way to the opposite end, and sat down facing his father as an equal. You see, that's the scene most people remember. That's the famous one. But the scene that matters, the one that actually tells you who Tyrion became, is the quiet one at the end. Because look at what's different. In the first scene, the chairs were a battlefield. Every person who entered the room was competing for proximity to power, for status, for Tywin's approval. The chairs were weapons. Where you sat defined who you were, and Tywin designed it that way on purpose. Well, in the final scene, nobody competes, because Tyrion has already arranged everything. The chairs aren't on one side anymore. They're evenly distributed around the table, balanced. There's no power seat. There's no headmaster's throne. There's no test to pass. By the time Bronn walks in, somehow the Master of Coin, a man whose first contribution to the meeting is asking about rebuilding the brothels, and Sam arrives in his Grand Maester robes, carrying a single heavy book called A Song of Ice and Fire that he helped the Archmeister title, and Davos takes his seat as Master of Ships, and Brienne sits as Lord Commander of the King's Guard. By the time all of them sit down, the room already feels organized, calm, functional, not because anyone announced that it would be, because Tyrion made it that way before they arrived. Silently, alone, with his hands on the backs of chairs. And here's the thing about this new council. Look at who's sitting in those chairs. A sellsword, a smuggler, a bookworm who stole his family's ancestral sword and became Grand Maester, a woman knight commanding the Kingsguard. These aren't the people who would have sat in Tywin's chairs. Tywin's council was full of schemers and climbers, people who deserved their seats the way wolves deserve a kill. Tyrion's council is full of survivors, people who made it to the end, not because they were the smartest or the most powerful, but because they were decent or stubborn or both. Tywin arranged chairs for predators. Tyrion arranged chairs for people. Look, and this is where the parallel becomes something deeper than a callback, because what Tyrion is doing in that room is exactly what Tywin did. He's using the physical arrangement of a space to set the tone before a single word is spoken. He's controlling the room through structure. He's understanding the way only a Lannister understands, that soft power matters, that how a room is organized determines how the people in it behave, that a chair in the right place can do more than a speech. The thing is, the intention is completely different. Tywin arranged chairs to dominate. He put them on one side so he could sit alone at the head, elevated, untouchable, watching his council scramble for scraps of proximity like dogs under a table. It was about ego, it was about fear, it was about making every person in that room feel smaller than the man at the top. Tyrion arranges chairs to heal. He pushes them up against both sides of the table, not crammed on one side like Tywin's arrangement, so that everyone has a proper seat, so that the room feels like a meeting instead of an audience. Tywin designed a courtroom. Tyrion designs a workspace. Here's the detail that gets me every time. Tyrion sits at the head, the same end of the table where Tywin once sat. The man who once dragged a chair across the room to claim the position opposite his father, the rebel, the outsider, the one who refused to play along, now sits in his father's seat. But it doesn't feel like conquest. It doesn't feel like ego. It feels like duty, because Tyrion isn't sitting there to dominate the room. He's sitting there because someone has to, and the realm needs.
That clean water leads to a healthier population. We have hungry people to feed.
The rebellion is over. The theater is over. The game is over. Now it's just work. And work doesn't need a throne. Work needs a table and chairs in the right place and people who are willing to show up. Basically, here's the question the fans argue about. Is this growth or is this tragedy? Has Tyrion transcended his father, or has he become him? Because the methodology is identical. Both men walk into a room before anyone else and arrange the furniture to control the outcome. Both men understand that the real power in a meeting isn't what gets said, it's the architecture of the space. Both men were, arguably, the most effective rulers of their generation. Kings who never wore a crown. Hands who ran the kingdom while the person on the throne did something else entirely. Both were unloved by the people they served. Tywin was feared, Tyrion is tolerated. Neither was thanked, and both ended up alone in a room, moving chairs, because that's what Lannisters do when the world won't listen. They rearrange the furniture and hope the room behaves better than the people in it. And yet, the answer is in the silence. Tywin arranged his chairs in silence because silence was his weapon. He used it to intimidate, to create discomfort, to force other people to speak first and reveal their weaknesses. Tyrion arranges his chairs in silence because silence is his peace. He's not performing. He's not testing. He's just a tired man in a broken city, putting furniture in order because the world outside is still in chaos. And this room, this one small room, is something he can fix. You know, Tywin used his physical presence to fill a room. His height, his stare, the weight of his silence. People shrank when Tywin walked in. Tyrion can't do that. He will never tower over anyone. He will never command a room with a glance. So he uses the room itself. He uses the structure, the layout, the careful placement of objects, because the space can command the respect that his body can't. Tywin dominated people. Tyrion dominates furniture. And somehow, watching him nudge a chair 2 inches to the left in a restored council chamber, a room that by all rights should have been rubble after Drogon's fire, but somehow stands intact, it feels like the bravest thing anyone does in the entire finale. Again, after 8 years of fire and blood, the show circles back to a familiar image. a Lannister running things from a council table. But where it began with a lion arranging chairs as a trap, it ends with a different lion arranging chairs as a gift. Tywin's chairs said, "Know your place." Tyrion's chairs say, "Take a seat. We have work to do." Technically, this entire analysis comes from 30 seconds of screen time, no words. Just a small man alone in a big room, pushing chairs against a table. And if you missed it, if you were checking your phone, or getting a drink, or thinking about how weird it is that Bran is king, you missed one of the most important details in the entire finale. Because the chairs tell you everything. They tell you that Tyrion Lannister learned from his father. They tell you that he's better than his father. And they tell you that the difference between a tyrant and a leader isn't power, or intelligence, or even intention. It's what you do with the chairs. And honestly, the fact that one of the final images the show gives us, after Brienne has closed the White Book, but before Arya sails west, before Sansa is crowned, before Jon walks north into the snow, is a man straightening chairs in a council chamber might be the most hopeful thing the show ever did, because it means the Game of Thrones is finally over. The wheel didn't break with fire or speeches or a revolution. It broke when someone walked into a room and arranged the furniture for cooperation instead of dominance. And what's left isn't a game. It's just a table, and someone needs to set it. And the smallest man in the room, the one nobody wanted, the one his own family tried to throw away, is the one doing the setting.